My name is Lena Moore, and I've always believed that the quietest moments in life are also the most revealing. That evening, everything felt still. Not heavy or ominous, just unusually still. Ethan had left not long ago. He said he was going to the store, something about eggs and bagels for the next morning. I'd barely looked up from the sink when he kissed my cheek and left his keys jingling behind him. I think I nodded, maybe mumbled "drive safe," and then the door closed, and the house exhaled. It was the kind of silence that only reveals itself once it settles in your bones. The television was off. No music. No clinking of dishes beyond my own. Even the neighbor's dog, which normally barked through the fence, was strangely quiet tonight. I didn't mind. I welcomed it. There's something sacred about solitude when you've been sharing space and conversation all day. The kind of solitude that lets your mind float freely, untethered by responsibility. Warm water ran over my hands, slightly too hot, but I didn't turn the tap. I liked the way it stung just a little. It reminded me I was here. Present. Real. The pendant light above the sink cast a soft amber hue over the kitchen, catching the edges of soap bubbles like miniature prisms. Every now and then, I could hear the soft creak of the old pipes, or the distant whoosh of a car passing along Atlantic Avenue. But mostly there was quiet. My fingers moved mechanically, plate, scrub, rinse, repeat. There was peace in the rhythm, and yet, beneath it all, a restlessness, so faint I almost mistook it for nothing. It wasn't a noise. It wasn't a shadow. It was a feeling, a subtle shift in the air, like the walls were holding their breath. I told myself it was nothing, maybe just the echo of being alone in a house too used to being full. But then for a brief moment I had the strangest sense that I wasn't. At first it was just a whisper of awareness, a subtle tightening in my chest, a flicker at the edge of my senses. I didn't hear anything. No door creaked. No footsteps echoed against the wooden floor. But something inside me stilled. The kind of stillness that doesn't come from peace, but from the body recognizing a shift before the mind can name it. I paused mid-motion, my fingers still wrapped around a dish, warm water trickling between my knuckles. And then I felt it. A presence. Not a sound. Not a touch. Just proximity. Warm. Close. Too close. The air behind me thickened. I could feel it. His breath. Subtle but undeniable, brushing the back of my neck like a current I hadn't invited. I didn't turn around. Somehow I already knew. Caleb. The scent reached me first. Sandalwood, edged faintly with tobacco and something colder underneath, like rain on steel. Not unpleasant. Familiar in a way I couldn't admit aloud. I swallowed, tried to focus on the water, tried to pretend I imagined it. But his silence was too precise, too loaded, too intentional. Every second he didn't speak felt louder than any words he could have said. The space between us shrank, not in distance but in permission. My spine straightened on instinct. My breath shallowed. He was behind me. He hadn't touched me, but he didn't have to. That was the worst part. The silence between us stretched. Not awkward, not accidental, but intentional. The kind that wraps itself around a moment, tightens it, makes it hard to breathe. I could feel his presence, just a breath behind me. Not touching, but too close for it to mean nothing. I didn't turn around. Not yet. Turning would mean acknowledging what was happening, and I wasn't ready to look it in the eye. So I spoke softly, almost to the sink, but the words were meant for him. "You shouldn't be here, Caleb." A pause. Then the low murmur of his voice, closer than before. "And yet, I am." There was no apology in his tone, just calm inevitability, as if he'd been rehearsing this for longer than I knew. My hands moved again mechanically, rinsing, stacking, but my body was no longer focused on the plates. It was attuned to the air, to him, to every unspoken word vibrating in the inches between us. "You didn't call," I said. "I didn't have to." That pulled a breath from me, tight and silent, because he was right. I hadn't needed a message. The way he looked at me the last time, I already knew this wasn't over. Still I whispered, "This isn't right." A slow chuckle, not mocking, but threaded with something far more dangerous certainty. "Then why haven't you moved?" I froze, because he was right again. My feet hadn't shifted. I hadn't pulled away. And worse, I hadn't wanted to. I closed my eyes, tried to drown in the sound of water still running in the sink, but his voice came again. Lower this time, softer, like a hand on my back without ever touching me. "Tell me you don't feel it." I clenched the edge of the counter. Every muscle in my body held taut, because I could lie. I should lie. But my silence said enough, and he knew it. I turned then, slowly, just enough to catch his figure in the periphery, tall, still eyes fixed on me, dark eyes, unmoving, unapologetic. "This isn't a game, Caleb," I whispered. He didn't flinch. "I'm not playing." He didn't move, and neither did I. The kitchen felt smaller. Walls that once offered comfort now seemed to press inward, closing the space between us inch by inch, even though we hadn't taken a single step. Outside, the rain tapped softly against the window, a quiet rhythm to match the quickening of my heartbeat. I looked at him fully now. He stood with his back relaxed against the counter, arms crossed, gaze steady, but there was nothing casual about him. His stillness was too deliberate, his silence too loud. "You need to leave," I said, voice barely above a breath. His brow lifted slightly, not in surprise, but in amusement. "Do you want me to?" That was the question, wasn't it? The one I'd been avoiding since the moment I felt his breath behind me, since the first glance that lingered too long. I didn't answer, because the truth, raw and inconvenient, sat at the back of my throat, daring me to speak it, and I couldn't. Instead, I looked away, back to the sink, to the bubbles fading into thin air, to something safe and ordinary, but nothing felt ordinary anymore, not with him here. And then he moved, not a full step, just a shift forward, subtle, careful, but enough to close the space I had failed to keep between us. I felt him now, the heat of his body radiating against mine. My breath caught in my chest. He didn't touch me, but he didn't have to. His voice was almost a whisper, low and deliberate. "Ethan doesn't know how to look at you." I turned sharply, jaw clenched. "Don't bring him into this." Caleb didn't back away. His eyes held mine. "But he's always here, isn't he? Even when he's not." That hit deeper than I expected, because it was true. Even in this moment, this blurred, almost wrong moment, I could feel Ethan's absence like a shadow on the floor between us. It didn't stop what was happening. I tried to step back, but Caleb leaned closer, slow, restrained, his face inches from mine. And for one suspended heartbeat, neither of us breathed. His lips hovered, not touching, not daring, but waiting. For me, for a signal, for a weakness. And I gave it, not through action, but through inaction. I didn't move. I didn't pull away. Right then a sound, the sudden crunch of tires on gravel. The driveway. "Ethan." Reality struck like a lightning flash. I jolted, breath catching like I just surfaced from underwater. "Go." My voice wasn't loud, but it had weight now. He didn't argue. He didn't smirk. He just looked at me. One long, unreadable glance. Then he turned, slipped out the back door like a shadow uninvited. The door whispered shut behind him. And I stood there in my kitchen, hands trembling, heart splitting between guilt and something far more dangerous, longing. The door closed behind Caleb, and the silence returned, but not the same silence as before. This one was sharper, hollow, the kind of silence that didn't soothe, but accused. I stood motionless by the sink. The water was still running. the plate in my hand still slick with soap, but my hands wouldn't move. I stared down at the bubbles sliding off porcelain and thought, what just happened? And worse, why didn't I stop it sooner? Then I heard it, the familiar jangle of keys, the front door opening. Lena. Ethan's voice rang out light unaware. You won't believe the line at the store. I got the last carton of eggs. I turned off the tap quickly, wiped my hands, and summoned a smile that felt like it belonged to someone else. Hey, I said, turning toward him. That's great. I was starting to think you got lost. He grinned, walking into the kitchen, bags in hand. Leaning in, he kissed my cheek, warm and easy. I didn't flinch, but it took effort. You okay? You look a little flushed. I reached up to tuck a loose strand of hair behind my ear. Anything to avoid his eyes too long. Just the steam from the water, I said lightly. You know how it gets. He nodded, laughing as he set the bags down. Told you not to overwork yourself. You never listen. I laughed too, not because it was funny, but because it was the expected response. We unpacked together. Milk, bagels, strawberries. His hand brushed mine as we reached for the same container. I smiled. He smiled. Everything looked the same, sounded the same, but inside me everything had changed. Because even as Ethan stood just inches away, speaking about breakfast plans and weekend ideas, I could still feel the ghost of Caleb's breath at my ear. The tension that had settled in my chest hadn't left. It lingered like a fingerprint on glass. You sure you're okay? Ethan asked again, frowning slightly. I nodded, too quickly. Yeah. Just tired. Tired of pretending. Tired of feeling things I shouldn't. Tired of not knowing what to do with the pieces of myself that no longer aligned. He accepted my answer with a kiss to my forehead. Warm, trusting, undeserved. And I let him. Because I didn't have the courage, not yet, to say what was really breaking beneath the surface. The days that followed were quiet, too quiet, the kind of quiet that doesn't soothe but scratches. It didn't matter that Ethan was home, that we still laughed, cooked, moved in orbit around each other like always. Something had shifted, and once you've noticed that shift, once you've seen that part of yourself in a different light, you can't unsee it. I tried to be normal. I made his favorite pasta. I watched a movie with him on the couch, legs curled under his arm like always. I answered emails, cleaned the house, called my sister. But underneath every action was a quiet current pulling me backward. To that night, to that breath behind my neck. To that moment I didn't stop. At the grocery store, I kept looking over my shoulder. In the mirror, I found myself lingering, trying to see what he saw. What I had maybe forgotten was still there. Every time I passed the cafe, my chest tightened. Not because I expected Caleb to be there, but because a part of me wanted him to be. And that terrified me. One evening, I opened my phone and stared at our old text thread. Caleb's number still unnamed, still unsaved. I told myself I was just checking, that I wasn't going to type anything, just a glance. But my fingers hovered anyway. No message was sent. Not that night. But the weight of almost was heavier than anything I'd ever said aloud. At night, Ethan held me like he always did. Safe. Steady. Familiar. And I lay there in the dark, pretending I was the same woman he believed me to be. But even as his breath steadied beside me, my mind whispered a truth I didn't want to name. I hadn't done anything wrong, but I wasn't innocent anymore. It started with a message. No name, just a number I recognized without needing to check. Thursday, 11:12 p.m. The house was quiet. Ethan had fallen asleep early, his breathing deep and even beside me. I had been scrolling aimlessly, recipes, news, anything but thought, when the screen lit up. You still think about it. No greeting. No explanation. Just 7 words. Too honest. Too invasive. Too true. I stared at it for a full minute, unmoving, then locked the phone, set it face down on the nightstand, but it was too late. The words had already entered me, like a whisper I hadn't asked to hear but couldn't forget. The next morning I told myself I imagined it, that I didn't need to respond, that silence was an answer, that indifference would be enough. But as I made coffee, I noticed how my hand trembled, just slightly, as I reached for the mug, how my eyes drifted toward the front window as if expecting to see him. And worse, how I found myself disappointed when I didn't. Days passed. Another message. Sunday.
9:46 Uhr morgens.
While Ethan was in the shower. I saw you yesterday. You looked beautiful. There had been no conversation, no approach, just a presence, somewhere behind the crowd, invisible but unmistakable. I didn't reply, but I didn't delete it either. That night I dreamt of him, not in the way I feared, but in the way I hadn't expected. Not touching, not kissing, just looking, from across the room, from the edge of a crowd, and I was the only one who saw him. His eyes said everything his mouth never did. I see you. I know you're not sleeping peacefully anymore, and I'm still here. In the morning I woke with a dull ache in my chest. Ethan was already in the kitchen, humming as he cooked eggs. Everything smelled normal. Everything looked right. And yet, I stood at the threshold of the hallway, watching my husband from a distance, and felt like an imposter in my own life, a stranger in my own skin. Because sometimes betrayal doesn't announce itself in grand gestures. It arrives softly, in a pause, a glance. A message left unanswered but never forgotten came on a Tuesday, quiet, overcast, the kind of day where everything feels half asleep. I was at my desk, half reading an email, half listening to the rain tapping against the glass, when my phone lit up. Caleb, no more hiding behind unsaved numbers. He knew I hadn't blocked him, and that was all the permission he needed. I'll be at the lake tomorrow. Noon. No pressure. Just air. That was all. No demand.
No expectation.
Just the kind of message that sounds harmless on the surface, but beneath it, a gravity I couldn't ignore. I stared at the words, then reread them. Just air. But that wasn't what he was offering. He was offering silence, space, pause between two lives. A place where no one else existed but him and me, and the version of me I didn't recognize, but maybe wanted to. That night I was quiet at dinner. Ethan noticed. "You okay?" he asked, wiping sauce from the corner of his mouth. "You've been somewhere else all evening." I forced a smile. "Just tired. Work stuff. Sharp ones." The rest of the day passed like walking through fog. I answered emails, did laundry, picked up groceries, things that should have felt grounding, but nothing felt rooted anymore. And in the pocket of my coat, my phone vibrated once. Just once. I knew who it was. I didn't look, because even before reading it, I already heard the voice behind the words. "You felt it too, Lena. Stop pretending you didn't." That night, Ethan brought 2 glasses of wine to the living room. A small gesture, a tradition we'd forgotten in recent months. We sat in silence, sipping slowly. He didn't reach for the remote, didn't check his phone, just looked at me longer than usual. "Is there something I should know?" he asked quietly. My chest tightened. I set the wine glass down too gently. "What do you mean?" He shrugged, but it was the kind of shrug that weighed more than it should. "I don't know. You've been elsewhere, not just tired. Different." I could have said anything, laughed, kissed him, redirected. Instead, I just looked down at my hands and said nothing, because sometimes betrayal isn't about what you've done. It's about what you've allowed to live quietly inside you, about the door you left unlocked and the guest you never asked to leave. Weeks passed. The tension between Ethan and me softened, not because it healed, but because it hardened into something familiar. something we both learned to walk around, like a crack in the floor we'd stop pointing out. We smiled, we ate dinner, we kissed goodnight, and we didn't talk about what neither of us dared to name. Caleb didn't message again, not after the last one. You've already made your choice, Lena. I just wonder if you're brave enough to admit it. He was right. Not about choosing him. I hadn't. But I hadn't chosen Ethan either. Not really. Not fully. Not in the way that mattered. Some nights I still think about the doc. About what would have happened if I had let myself fall. If I'd crossed the line out loud instead of just inside my chest. But the truth is, I didn't need to kiss him to betray what I had. Because emotional fidelity is a house you tend every day. And once I stopped tending it, once I let someone else live in the rooms of my thoughts, I'd already left. Ethan still doesn't know. Maybe he never will. Maybe he already does and just can't bear to name it. And me? I've learned how to carry this quietly, how to smile through it, how to sleep beside love I once swore was enough, how to say I'm fine and almost believe it, because sometimes the deepest betrayals aren't loud, they're quiet, they're daily, they live in the pauses between I love you and good night, and sometimes the affair that ruins everything is the one you never have. This story is a work of fiction inspired by real emotional complexities in human relationships. It does not condone infidelity, emotional betrayal, or any form of dishonesty in marriage or partnership. Its purpose is to explore the quiet, often unseen struggles that can exist behind seemingly stable lives. The moments we don't talk about, but that deeply shape who we are and who we become. If this story resonates with your experience, we encourage self-reflection, open communication, and where needed, seeking help or counseling with a licensed professional. Everyone deserves honesty, and every story, no matter how quiet, matters.